Emma sat cross-legged on her dorm bed, the soft hum of her laptop filling the otherwise silent room. The glow from the screen painted her face in pale blues and whites, highlighting the dark circles under her eyes. College life had been isolating lately. While her peers laughed in hallways or chatted in cafes, Emma often found herself alone, scrolling endlessly through social media to fill the silence. But tonight felt different. A strange tension hung in the air, subtle yet persistent, like the room itself was holding its breath. Her roommate, Alex, had always seemed a little distant, a little unpredictable, but Emma had shrugged it off as just part of their personalities clashing. Yet recently, things were changing. Small details began to unsettle her. Books that were once neatly stacked now lay scattered across the floor. Her notebooks, closed the night before, were open, pages flipped haphazardly. And always, the faint scent of something unfamiliar, metallic, almost like blood, though faint enough that she questioned her own senses. The clock struck 2 a.m., the dorm silent except for the occasional creak of the old building settling. Emma's phone buzzed softly on the nightstand. A text from Alex, "Be careful tonight. Don't trust the shadows." Emma frowned, confusion twisting in her stomach. It was an odd message, unnerving in its vagueness. Emma tried to ignore it, telling herself she was overthinking. But the feeling of being watched had grown stronger. She glanced at the slightly ajar door, half expecting Alex to be peeking around the corner. Nothing, just the hallway stretching into darkness, lit by flickering fluorescent lights. A draft whispered through the room, ruffling her hair. Her heart rate quickened, a low thrum of unease settling in her chest. Deciding she needed a distraction, Emma poured herself a cup of tea. As she waited for the kettle to boil, she noticed the small desk mirror across the room catching movement in its reflection. She spun around, eyes wide, but the room was empty. Yet the reflection lingered a beat too long on the corner where Alex usually sat, an uncanny pause that made her skin crawl. Hours passed, and the night grew heavier. The sounds of distant laughter from the dorm lounge felt warped, echoing in unnatural patterns. Emma tried to rationalize. Maybe the old building's acoustics were playing tricks on her. But then she heard it. A faint whisper, almost a sigh, coming from the hallway. Emma, her name, unmistakably, yet distorted, as though carried through layers of static. She froze, every muscle in her body rigid. The whisper came again, clearer this time, closer. Emma's pulse pounded in her ears. She backed toward the wall, every shadow now a potential threat. "Alex?" she called softly, her voice trembling. No answer, just the faint scratching of something moving along the hallway floor. Gathering courage, Emma stepped into the hall, her bare feet cold against the linoleum. The corridor stretched before her like a black tunnel, doors closed tightly, yet one at the end was slightly ajar, Alex's door. She approached, each step slow and deliberate, the hairs on her arms standing on end. The door creaked as she pushed it, and her breath caught. The room was empty, no sign of Alex anywhere. Her laptop was gone. The small stack of books she had left that morning vanished. Emma's stomach twisted. Panic rose like a wave. She ran back to her room, searching for clues, her hands trembling. Then she noticed it, drawn in faint white chalk on the dorm's wooden floor, a symbol she didn't recognize. It looked like a spiral, almost hypnotic, with jagged lines cutting through it. Emma dropped to her knees, tracing it with her fingers, heart hammering, when suddenly she felt a cold draft brush past her neck. Spinning around, she saw nothing. The room was silent again, yet the weight of presence was undeniable. Emma realized with dawning horror that Alex hadn't just left. It was as if they had been erased from existence. Phones, messages, even memories in her mind all suggested Alex had existed yesterday. But now, every trace was gone except for that symbol. Emma's thoughts raced, paranoia gripping her. She considered calling campus security, but hesitated, fearing what they might find, or what might find her. Every creak of the building, every flicker of light, seemed amplified, echoing the fear that something unseen was watching. Her own reflection in the mirror seemed different now, tense, almost alert. Was it her imagination, or did the reflection twitch before she did? She sank onto her bed, wrapping herself in the blanket like a shield, trembling. Sleep would not come, and as the night stretched on, the whisper returned, this time unmistakable, floating from the slightly open door. "I'm still here." Emma pulled the covers tighter over her head, heart racing, mind spiraling. Outside, the dorm remained quiet, but she could feel the empty space where Alex had been, oppressive and real. Something had changed forever, and Emma knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning of a long, sleepless night. The camera would linger on the chalk symbol, the faint flicker of the hallway light, and the hint of movement in the mirror, just enough to leave the audience questioning what was real and what lurked unseen. Jake worked the night shift at a small, dimly lit convenience store on the edge of town. The fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting long, jittering shadows across the aisles. Outside, rain lashed against the windows in cold sheets, turning the empty parking lot into a mirror of reflections. Headlights that never existed, shapes that seemed to move on their own. Jake rubbed his temples, exhausted from hours of monotony, yet something gnawed at the back of his mind. It started innocuously enough. Silent phone calls in the dead of night once, maybe twice. At first, Jake ignored them, assuming it was a wrong number or a prank. But when the calls began coming every night, his curiosity was replaced by unease. Every time he picked up, the line was dead quiet, save for the faint static and the whisper of his own breathing. And yet, somewhere in that emptiness, he felt a presence, as if someone were standing just behind him, waiting. One particularly stormy evening, he sat behind the counter, hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee. The rhythmic tapping of rain against the window was the only sound that broke the oppressive silence of the store. The phone rang, shrill and insistent, cutting through the calm. Jake's heart lurched. He grabbed the receiver, holding it to his ear. Nothing, just the static. And then, a faint voice, barely audible, whispered, "I'm closer than you think." The words sank into him like ice water. He looked around the store, shelves casting warped shadows, the fluorescent hum threatening to crack. The hair on the back of his neck rose. No one was there. The aisles were empty, the automatic doors locked from the outside. Yet the sensation persisted. He wasn't alone. Night after night, the calls grew more frequent, more persistent. They came at 3 a.m., 2 a.m., sometimes even in the middle of the day when he wasn't expecting them. The voice, when it finally spoke, was always slightly different. A distortion that twisted familiarity into menace. "I'm watching you. You shouldn't be here alone." Each whisper was closer than the last, closer than he could explain. Jake tried to rationalize. Maybe it was someone playing a prank, someone who knew his schedule. But rationality offered little comfort. One night, after a particularly long shift, he returned to his apartment, rain soaking through his coat. The phone rang again. Hesitation gripped him. Dread pooled in his stomach. Slowly, he lifted it. The line was silent. And then, faintly, unmistakably, "Behind you." He spun around, heart hammering, but his apartment was empty. Nothing. Just the faint flicker of a streetlight through the window and the shadows of furniture that seemed to lean toward him. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but curiosity and fear held him in place, frozen. The calls didn't just haunt him. They were shaping the space around him, warping reality until the familiar became untrustworthy. Days passed in a blur. Jake stopped answering unknown numbers. He kept his phone on silent, paranoid about the possibility of hearing that distorted whisper, that low, predatory familiarity. But it didn't help. Even without the calls, he felt their presence. In the bathroom mirror, in the kitchen corner, in the empty hallway outside his apartment door. The line between real and imagined began to blur. One night, after hours of restless pacing, he sat on his couch, staring at the phone. The storm outside raged, wind rattling the windows like skeletal fingers scratching at the glass. The phone rang. Slowly, he picked it up, voice tight. "Hello." Silence, heavy and oppressive, filled the room. Then the whisper, "I'm inside with you." Jake's blood ran cold. He dropped the phone, scrambling to turn on every light in the apartment. Nothing. No one. But the feeling remained, a malevolent pressure that pressed against his chest, tight and suffocating. His breaths came in shallow, rapid gasps. Shadows seemed to crawl along the walls, stretching unnaturally, as if the room itself had come alive. In desperation, he grabbed a knife from the kitchen, moving slowly through his apartment, every creak of the floor amplified in his mind. He checked the bedroom, the closet, behind the couch. Nothing. Yet he couldn't shake the sense of being watched, stalked, hunted. Every flicker of light, every subtle movement, seemed to taunt him. Then the call stopped. At first, relief washed over him, tentative and fragile. He allowed himself a shaky breath, imagining a return to normalcy. But the reprieve was short-lived. One evening, while reviewing security footage from the store, he froze. There, in the reflection of the glass door, stood a figure, a dark silhouette, watching him with a stillness that made his blood run cold. The whispers returned, soft but menacing, echoing in the empty apartment. "You can't hide from me." Jake realized then, with a clarity that chilled him to the bone, that the entity wasn't just calling him. It was already inside, in his space, in his life, inescapable. Sleep became impossible. Every shadow, every flicker of light, every silence was filled with anticipation, the dread of waiting for the inevitable next call. The night stretched endlessly, the storm raging outside now a backdrop to the storm inside Jake's mind. Every nerve screamed with tension, every sense heightened to the point of agony. And somewhere, just beyond perception, the silent phone calls continued, a relentless, haunting promise that some presence had crossed the threshold, and there was no turning back. Maya had always been drawn to places most people avoided. Crumbling buildings, forgotten tunnels, and now, an abandoned carnival on the outskirts of town. Her backpack felt unusually heavy tonight, but she told herself it was the gear she carried. Camera, flashlight, notebooks, and an odd sense of thrill. The moon peeked through clouds, casting a silvery glow that barely penetrated the thick fog surrounding the carnival. The air smelled of rust, decayed wood, and damp leaves, a strange cocktail that made her stomach churn with anticipation. The entrance archway loomed ahead, skeletal and broken, a once vibrant sign peeling and faded. Faint carnival music seemed to echo from nowhere, warped and distorted, like a record left to spin in the wrong speed. Maya hesitated, the hairs on her arms standing on end. Every instinct screamed to turn back, but curiosity, that irresistible urge to uncover secrets, pushed her forward. As she stepped onto the cracked pavement, the sound of her boots echoed unnaturally. The Ferris wheel loomed in the distance, rusted and motionless. Yet for a fleeting second, it seemed to creak, as if whispering her name. She shined her flashlight across the grounds, illuminating broken game booths, toppled benches, and faded posters of clowns frozen in permanent smiles. The fog curled around her ankles, thickening as if to pull her deeper into the carnival's forgotten heart. At first, Maya explored cautiously, each step deliberate. Her camera clicked, the flash briefly illuminating the grotesque beauty of the ruins. Chipped paint on a carousel horse, a teddy bear half buried in mud, carnival masks staring lifelessly from a shattered window. There was something cinematic about it, almost surreal, like walking through a dream that teetered on the edge of nightmare. But then she noticed movement, shadows that didn't align with her flashlight beam. One moment, a tent flap hung still. The next, it twitched, reacting to something unseen. Maya's pulse quickened, each exhale loud in the oppressive silence. She called out softly, testing the emptiness. "Hello? Anyone here?" Only the wind replied, rustling through broken ticket booths. Yet a chill ran down her spine as if her voice had stirred something dormant. She pressed on, drawn toward the carousel at the carnival center. Its paint was flaking, horses frozen mid-leap, eyes painted wide in a permanent scream of joy. She stepped closer, the flashlight beam trembling in her grip. A faint, high-pitched giggle echoed through the fog. Maya froze, straining to listen. The sound seemed distant, yet unnervingly close at the same time, impossible to locate. The air grew colder, damp clinging to her skin. The fog thickened, wrapping around her like ghostly fingers. Her flashlight flickered once, twice, then stabilized. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, stretching across the carnival grounds. Maya's breaths became shallow, her heartbeat a drum in her ears. Every instinct told her to leave, yet the magnetic pull of the unknown kept her rooted. She stumbled upon a tent half-collapsed into the mud. Inside, she found remnants of someone's past. A child's lost shoe, faded drawings pinned to rotting fabric, a small music box with a cracked glass dome. The music box, when touched, played a hauntingly warped tune. Maya's stomach twisted. There was life here once, laughter once existed, but now, only the echoes remained. And yet, the giggling continued, a soft, taunting echo that seemed to move with her. Her flashlight swept across the mist, catching a fleeting silhouette near the Ferris wheel. Tall, thin, motionless. When she blinked, it was gone. Maya's imagination screamed at her, but the rational part of her mind insisted she was alone. And yet, the air itself seemed to hum, vibrating with a presence she couldn't see but could feel pressing close. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes. Each shadow, each faint sound, twisted her perception. At one point, the carousel suddenly creaked, a horse moving slightly as if it had breathed for the first time in decades. Maya's stomach lurched. She stumbled back, flashlight swinging wildly, illuminating the mist that danced like living smoke. She realized then that the carnival was not entirely abandoned. Something or someone had never left. The wind carried whispers, indistinct yet deliberate. Words, half-formed, brushed against her consciousness. Play, stay, forever. Maya felt a cold hand on her shoulder, though when she spun, nothing was there. Panic surged, turning her curiosity into desperation. Every instinct screamed for her to run, to escape the unnatural fog that seemed to stretch on forever. She bolted, heart hammering, boots slipping on wet pavement. The carnival became a maze, familiar paths twisting into unfamiliar angles. The Ferris wheel, once in the distance, now seemed impossibly close, looming overhead like a sentinel. Shadows darted in her peripheral vision, disappearing when confronted directly. Every turn, every glance, heightened the tension, her mind balancing on the edge of terror and fascination. Finally, she reached the exit archway. Relief surged, only to be cut short by the faint sound of distorted laughter. Closer, right behind her. Maya's breath caught in her throat. The fog parted momentarily, revealing a figure. A childlike silhouette, face obscured, standing perfectly still. And then, just as quickly, it vanished, leaving only the echo of that chilling giggle. Maya stumbled out onto the empty road beyond the carnival, the fog beginning to lift as if it had never existed. She gasped for air, trembling uncontrollably, backpack clattering to the asphalt. Her camera had captured everything. The carousel, the tents, the shadows. But even the footage felt wrong, warped in ways her eyes hadn't recorded. She looked back once, and the carnival seemed dormant again, frozen in decay. But deep in her gut, she knew it was waiting, watching, patient. And somewhere within that fog, the echoes of laughter and distorted music promised that this place would call to her again, and next time, she might not escape. The night sky stretched overhead, calm and indifferent. But Maya could still feel the carnival lingering in her mind, a cinematic nightmare she could neither erase nor forget. Clara had always enjoyed the hum of the city at night, the soft buzz of traffic, the occasional siren, and the distant laughter drifting through open windows. But lately, the sounds had begun to unsettle her. She lived in a modest high-rise, and though the city thrived outside, within her apartment, a different kind of life seemed to stir. One she couldn't explain. Footsteps, faint at first, echoed above her ceiling, each one deliberate, careful, yet impossible to ignore. She had lived there for almost 6 months, and the apartment above hers had been empty for just as long, according to the building manager. Yet each night, as she settled into her quiet routine, cooking dinner, reading, or scrolling through her phone, the footsteps returned, moving with increasing purpose. At first, Clara dismissed them. Old buildings creak, HVAC systems hum, but even she could feel the difference. These weren't random noises. They had rhythm, intent, almost as if someone was pacing just to be heard. Tonight was worse. The city's usual hum was drowned out by the sporadic patter of rain against the window, the cold wind pressing against the glass like ghostly fingers. Clara sat on the couch, laptop open, half watching a documentary she barely registered. The sound above started softly, a single tap, then another, then a sequence that grew faster, more insistent. She paused the video, heart tightening. Tap, 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 tap. It wasn't the building. It was deliberate. Her eyes flicked to the ceiling. "Hello?" she called softly, voice shaking despite herself. No reply, only silence, then a scraping sound that made her stomach twist. Something heavy shifted above her, dragging across the floor with a slow, deliberate pace. Clara's pulse raced. She considered calling the building manager, but hesitation rooted her to the spot. What if they didn't believe her? What if someone was up there already? She decided to investigate. Grabbing a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, she ascended to the stairwell connecting her apartment to the one above, a maintenance access route rarely used by tenants. Her footsteps echoed unnaturally, bouncing off cold concrete walls. The closer she got, the heavier the air felt, thick with tension and the scent of something faintly metallic, almost like rust. Each step was measured, heart hammering with anticipation. At the top landing, the door to the apartment above loomed, nondescript but imposing. Its surface was scratched, faint traces of what might have been previous attempts to force it open. Clara hesitated, placing her hand on the doorknob. The metal was ice-cold under her fingers. She twisted it slightly, locked, of course. But then she heard it. A slow, deliberate scrape along the inside of the floorboards. Someone or something was aware of her presence. Fear surged, yet curiosity pulled her closer. Clara crouched slightly, pressing her ear against the door. Faint whispers, almost imperceptible, reached her. She couldn't make out words, only a sense of movement, deliberate and menacing. Every instinct screamed at her to step back, but she had already committed too far. She reached for her phone to call for help, and the lights in the stairwell flickered violently, plunging her momentarily into darkness. When the light returned, a shadow shifted behind the frosted glass of the door. Clara gasped, stepping back. The shadow didn't resemble any human figure she knew. It was distorted, elongated, and yet undeniably alive. A soft creak of the floorboards accompanied it. She swallowed hard, the air thick with tension, the silence pressing down like a living weight. Summoning courage, Clara ran her fingers along the edge of the door, noticing a tiny trapdoor built into the ceiling of the upper apartment's hallway, something no tenant would normally see. Her mind raced. Could someone have been living above her unnoticed this whole time? How could it have been possible? And why now, why tonight, did the presence feel so urgent, so insistent? The scratching intensified, a rhythmic sound echoing from above, then abruptly stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Clara's breath hitched. She felt eyes on her, though she couldn't see anyone. The apartment, once ordinary, now seemed alive, watching, waiting, calculating. A sense of helplessness washed over her as she realized the entity above wasn't just making noise. It was communicating in a way only she could feel. Suddenly, the trapdoor creaked open by itself. Clara's heart leapt into her throat. Her flashlight flickered, illuminating a narrow space above. Dark, oppressive, yet impossibly close. A shadow moved inside, almost gliding, then paused. And then, a whisper, carried through the floorboards like a cold wind. "I see you." Clara stumbled backward, gripping the stair railing for support. Every instinct screamed to run, yet her legs felt frozen. The air thickened, her apartment below now seeming smaller, vulnerable, exposed. The presence above was patient, deliberate, inhumanly calm, yet radiating a quiet menace that made her skin crawl. She retreated slowly down the stairs, never turning her back, flashlight shaking. Her apartment door closed with a shudder, locking into place, but the echo of footsteps above didn't stop. They paused, retraced, and moved again, a pattern only she could perceive. Clara sank to the floor, trembling, realizing that the apartment above wasn't empty, and perhaps never had been. As she clutched the blanket on her couch, she felt a subtle, chilling vibration beneath her feet. Every shadow in the room seemed to stretch toward her. The city outside was alive, indifferent, but within her walls, she was trapped with something unseen, something waiting for the perfect moment. Clara closed her eyes, listening. Tap, 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 tap. The rhythm continued, a promise that the apartment above would not rest until it had made itself known. Sam had been grappling with grief for months. The loss of his younger sister had left a hollow ache in his chest that sleep couldn't soothe and distractions couldn't mask. Nights were the hardest. Alone in his room, the shadows seemed to stretch endlessly, consuming corners that daylight had once filled with warmth. It was during one of these long, sleepless nights that the first anomaly appeared. The mirror in his bathroom didn't quite match reality. At first, he thought he was imagining it. His reflection lingered slightly longer than it should have after he moved, fingers stretching a fraction of a second slower than his own. Dismissing it as exhaustion, he splashed water on his face and turned away. But when he glanced back, his reflection smirked faintly, a curl of lips he hadn't made. The chill that ran down his spine was immediate, sharp, and inescapable. Sam tried to rationalize. Perhaps the poor lighting, the fatigue, the grief clouding his mind. Yet the sensation persisted, a gnawing, inescapable unease. Over the next few nights, the mirror grew more active. It moved independently. Sometimes it blinked when Sam didn't, tilted its head in ways he hadn't, and occasionally seemed to look past him, as though seeing something he could not. One evening, Sam's apartment was silent save for the faint hum of his refrigerator. He approached the bathroom, the pale light from the ceiling flickering with a nervous rhythm. He stared into the mirror, compelled despite every instinct screaming at him to stop. Slowly, his reflection began to move differently, lifting a hand before he did, tilting its head with curiosity. Sam's heart thundered. His mouth went dry. Fear coiled in his stomach, tightening with every second. He stepped back, the hardwood floor cold beneath his feet. The reflection's eyes followed him, unblinking, intelligent, unervingly alive. Sam felt as if the glass had become a window into another world, one that mirrored reality, yet twisted it, darkened it, and laughed silently at his disbelief. He turned away, breath rapid, pacing the small apartment. But no matter where he went, the feeling followed. The mirror in his room, the one above his dresser, even the reflection of the television screen. All seemed to pulse with subtle anomalies. Shadows and reflections moved when he didn't. Faint shapes lingered behind him, and worst of all, the reflection sometimes smiled. Sleep became impossible. Each night, he'd lie awake, staring at the faint glow of his digital clock, heart hammering, every sound amplified. The faintest creak of the floorboards, the low hum of the heating system, every passing car outside, all seemed to synchronize with the mirror's silent movements. Sam felt hunted, stalked by something that mimicked life yet warped it, a presence patient enough to toy with his sanity. Then one night, the reflection stepped forward. Not in the mirror. Sam froze as a figure emerged from the glass, just a whisper of motion, like condensation shifting on a window pane. His own features stared back at him, yet twisted, elongated in subtle, horrifying ways. Sam's mouth fell open, and the figure mimicked him, then smiled wider than he could, a grin filled with malice. Panic overtook him. He stumbled back, arms flailing, knocking over a lamp. Shadows danced wildly across the walls, stretching with impossible length. The reflection, no, the entity, remained motionless, watching, patient, and omnipresent. Sam realized that it didn't just exist in the mirror. It had found a way to invade the space around him, to blur the lines between reflection and reality. In desperation, he tried covering every mirror, turning every reflective surface toward the wall, even draping sheets over windows. Yet, each time he moved, he saw a glimpse of it. A flash in the oven glass, a flicker in his phone screen, shadows that didn't align with the room's geometry. It was everywhere, and nowhere, an omnipotent presence that thrived on fear and isolation. His phone rang suddenly, sharp and jarring. Sam froze, staring at the screen. Unknown number. Reluctantly, he answered. Silence. Then, faintly, the same distorted voice from his reflection. You can't look away. The words echoed in the apartment, overlapping the ambient hum of his electronics. Sam's breathing quickened. His reflection shifted again, curling its lips in that same sinister grin, seeming to whisper in tandem with the voice. Desperate for escape, he considered leaving, but even the act felt futile. Each time he stepped toward the door, the reflection, or whatever it was, mirrored him perfectly, yet always one step ahead, taunting, patient, relentless. Sam realized the truth with a horror that paralyzed him. The entity had learned his habits, studied him, anticipated every movement. His home, once a sanctuary, had become a trap. The nights stretched on endlessly, a taut string of fear and anticipation. Every reflective surface seemed to pulse with life. Sam clutched a chair, sliding backward, his mind fraying, aware that the entity would not tire, would not stop, and would wait until exhaustion left him vulnerable. And then, a final whisper, almost tender, almost intimate, carried from the mirror. We are the same now, Sam screamed, lunging at the mirror with everything he had. Shattering glass sprang across the floor, jagged and sparkling in the flickering light. But the space it once occupied was already empty, yet not. He could feel it behind him, in the shadows of the apartment that had become alien. The reflection had vanished from the surface, yet its presence lingered, insidious, patient, a promise that the torment had only just begun. And in the silence that followed, broken only by the rain against the windows, Sam knew that sleep would no longer exist as he once knew it. Tom and Lila had been hiking all day, venturing deeper into the dense forest than they ever had before. The canopy above was thick, sunlight barely filtering through the tangled branches, casting jagged shadows across the moss-covered ground. Birds had grown silent as the hours passed, and the wind whispered through the skeletal trees in a way that made Lila shiver despite her layered clothing. She clutched her backpack's straps tightly, trying to push away the unease curling in her stomach. Tom, ever the optimist, tried to keep the mood light, but even he could not ignore the oppressive silence that seemed to follow them. Hours later, as dusk bled into night, the couple stumbled upon a cabin hidden behind overgrown bushes and twisted vines. Its wooden walls were darkened with age, windows clouded with dust, and the roof sagged as though the structure had been abandoned for decades. Tom's curiosity flared. Lila's unease deepened. Yet, drawn by a mix of adventure and necessity, the forest was growing colder, and darkness encroached quickly. They decided to investigate. The door creaked violently as Tom pushed it open, a cloud of stale air greeting them like a forgotten breath. Inside, the cabin smelled of damp wood, rot, and something faintly coppery. The floorboards groaned under their weight, and cobwebs clung to corners and ceiling beams. The room was sparse. A rusted stove, a broken chair, and remnants of a small bed frame. Yet, as they explored further, they noticed strange symbols etched into the walls, crude carvings that seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light. This place is creepy, Lila whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Tom nodded, unease creeping into his chest despite his attempt to appear brave. They continued to search, finding remnants of the past. Animal bones carefully arranged on a shelf, scraps of old newspapers with articles too faded to read, and a diary tucked under the bed. Lila picked it up, dusting it off. The pages were yellowed and brittle, filled with scribbled notes about the forest, strange rituals, and a warning. They watch when you think you are alone. A shiver ran down Lila's spine. Tom, trying to mask his own rising tension, suggested they leave before nightfall fully enveloped them. But as they turned toward the door, the forest outside seemed darker, the trees forming unnatural shapes against the fading sky. A low wind moaned through the cabin's cracks, carrying faint whispers that made them both freeze. They were not alone. They could feel it in the weight of the air, in the oppressive stillness that pressed against their skin. Night fell quickly, and the cabin became an island of shadow in the forest. Tom and Lila lit a small lantern, its flickering glow revealing the room in fragmented patterns. Each movement cast long, distorted shadows, and every corner seemed to shift subtly when unobserved. The couple huddled close, trying to ignore the faint scratching sound coming from above, like claws tracing the ceiling beams. Every instinct screamed at them to leave, yet the forest outside was now a maze of black, impossible to navigate in the dark. Hours passed, and the noises grew bolder. A rhythmic tapping, almost deliberate, echoed through the cabin. Lila clutched Tom's arm as the diary slipped from her hands and landed open on the floor. The symbols inside seemed to writhe slightly in the lantern light, as though the shadows themselves were alive. A cold draft swept through the cabin, extinguishing the flame for a brief, suffocating moment, leaving them in near-total darkness. Their breathing filled the void, loud and panicked. Then, a whisper, soft but chilling, drifted from the corner of the cabin. "You shouldn't have come here," it said. Tom froze, scanning the shadows, but no figure was visible. Lila's hands shook as she reached for the lantern, reigniting the flame with a trembling hand. The light revealed the cabin once more, but now the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, forming shapes that shouldn't exist. A sense of being watched pressed against them, intangible yet undeniable. They tried to leave, but the door, which had opened easily before, now refused to budge. Panic set in, adrenaline spiking as they shoved and kicked. The whispers became voices, overlapping and distorted, surrounding them. Tom grabbed a chair, brandishing it defensively, while Lila scanned the room for another exit. The shadows pulsed as though breathing, and faint scratching traced along the walls and floorboards, moving closer with each passing second. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked loudly above them. Tom and Lila exchanged terrified glances. "Someone's up there," Tom whispered, voice barely audible. Lila shook her head. "No, no one should be here." The whispering ceased for a heartbeat, then resumed, louder, clearer, and impossibly close. It spoke in the same words as the diary. "They watch when you think you are alone." Every instinct screamed to run. They bolted for a back window, breaking it open and leaping into the cold, damp forest beyond. Branches whipped against their faces and arms as they ran blindly through the underbrush, guided only by instinct and fear. Behind them, the cabin stood silent once more, as if nothing had happened, yet the memory of the whispers and shadows pressed into their minds. Eventually, they emerged onto the forest path, breathless and trembling. The cabin was gone. Not physically, but in their minds, it remained vivid, alive with unseen presences and lingering dread. Neither spoke. Words felt meaningless in the face of what they had experienced. The forest seemed calm now, yet the echoes of the cabin's darkness followed them, a promise that it still watched, patient and eternal, waiting for the next lost souls to wander too far into the trees. Even weeks later, Tom and Lila would wake in the middle of the night, haunted by whispers and the faint memory of cold drafts, the symbols, and the feeling of unseen eyes. The forgotten cabin, abandoned yet alive in ways they could not comprehend, had left an indelible mark on their minds, a cinematic nightmare that would never truly end. Jared had always been fascinated by old footage. Collecting forgotten VHS tapes and grainy digital recordings had become a hobby, an escape from the monotony of his desk job and the endless notifications of modern life. But one rainy evening, in the dim glow of his apartment, he stumbled upon a tape unlike any he had ever seen. It was unlabeled, its case worn and sticky with age. Something about it drew him in, a quiet insistence he couldn't explain. He inserted the tape into the player, the screen flickering to life with static and muted colors. At first, the footage seemed mundane. A family gathering in a sunlit living room, laughter echoing softly, a birthday cake with flickering candles. But then, something caught his eye. In the corner of the frame, barely visible, stood a figure he hadn't noticed before. A man, tall and thin, with a featureless face obscured by shadow. He didn't move, didn't react, yet he was undeniably there. Jared leaned closer, squinting at the screen. The figure seemed impossible, a background element that shouldn't exist. But the longer he watched, the more certain he became. The stranger wasn't just in the video, he was aware. With every passing second, the figure shifted slightly, always just on the edge of perception, yet unmistakably watching. A chill ran down Jared's spine. He paused the tape, rewinding and replaying the section over and over. The figure remained silent, still, yet undeniably present. It was watching him now, he felt it. The hairs on his arms stood on end, goosebumps rising as an invisible pressure seemed to press against the room. His apartment felt smaller, darker, the flickering light of the television casting exaggerated shadows across the walls. Ignoring the warning bells in his mind, Jared continued watching. The video changed subtly with each replay. Background elements shifted. Objects appeared in new positions, a clock ticking backward, shadows lengthening unnaturally. The stranger's presence intensified, now stepping slightly closer in each replay, though his face remained obscured, void-like. Jared realized with growing horror that he had not stumbled upon a recording of the past. The video was alive, adapting to his gaze. A soft static hum began emanating from the television speakers, growing louder with each second. Jared tried to turn it off, but the remote seemed unresponsive, the buttons frozen beneath his fingers. The figure moved again, now closer to the camera, tilting its head as if studying him. Jared's breath quickened. The boundaries between tape and reality blurred. He could feel the stranger's awareness probing into his mind, pressing against his thoughts, testing his fear. Panic set in. Jared yanked the tape from the player, tossing it across the room. It hit the wall with a dull thud. But the image didn't disappear. The stranger remained, now projected in his peripheral vision, standing silently behind him, featureless eyes locked on his spine. Every instinct screamed to run, but he was frozen, held hostage by the surreal and impossible presence. Then, a whisper, carried not through the speakers, but through the air around him. "I see you." Jared spun around, but the room was empty. The tape lay on the floor, inert, yet the sense of being observed persisted, lingering like smoke that refused to dissipate. The television flickered once more, displaying a single frame. The stranger, now inches from the camera, motionless yet terrifyingly alive. Jared stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet, knocking over a chair. The hum from the TV became a low, vibrating growl, filling the apartment with oppressive sound. Shadows from his furniture stretched unnaturally across the walls, distorting into shapes that mimicked the figure on the screen. He could feel it. The stranger wasn't confined to the video anymore. The presence had entered his reality, seeping through the boundaries of electronics, shadows, and perception. Desperate, Jared yanked the TV's plug from the wall. Silence fell abruptly, yet the oppressive sensation did not lift. The apartment felt heavier, colder, as if the figure now existed in every corner, every darkened space. A single thought haunted him. This presence was patient. It had been waiting, watching, and now it had him exactly where it wanted. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, time seemed distorted. Jared stayed huddled in a corner, his back against the wall, unable to move. The whispers returned, soft and insistent, coming from every angle. "Don't look away. Don't turn your back." Every shadow flickered in response, twisting and bending, creating illusions of movement that kept him on edge. Sleep, refuge, and reality itself seemed impossible. Eventually, dawn crept into the apartment, weak and gray. Jared, exhausted and trembling, stared at the corner where the television had been. It was gone, removed from the wall, yet the room felt contaminated, as if the stranger had left a residual presence, a dark stain on perception itself. The tape, however, remained on the floor, despite every rational thought screaming to burn it, shred it, or throw it into the river. Jared knew he couldn't. Some part of him, terrified and mesmerized, wanted to see it again. Rachel had always been curious about the old Victorian house she had recently inherited from her late aunt. Its grandeur was undeniable. Tall ceilings, ornate woodwork, and a lingering scent of polish mixed with something older, something forgotten. Yet, there was one part of the house that had always been off-limits: the basement. Locked for decades, it was said to be filled with old belongings and cobwebs, but Rachel's instincts told her there was more. That night, alone and restless, she found herself standing at the heavy wooden door that led to the basement. Her fingers traced the intricate carvings, the grain worn smooth over decades. The key, cold and brass, fit perfectly, and with a hesitant twist, the lock clicked open. A shiver ran down her spine as the door creaked, revealing stairs that plunged into darkness. She switched on her flashlight, the beam cutting a narrow path into the void below. The air was thick and musty, carrying the scent of damp wood and earth. Each step she took down the stairs groaned under her weight, echoing in the confined space. The basement was larger than she had anticipated, a labyrinth of old furniture, crates, and shelves stacked with dusty jars and forgotten objects. Shadows stretched unnaturally, twisting into shapes that seemed almost alive. Rachel's heartbeat quickened as she moved deeper, flashlight shaking in her trembling hands. It wasn't long before she noticed the first anomaly. A rocking chair, positioned near the center of the room, gently swaying as though someone had just left it. The air grew colder, pressing against her skin like invisible hands. Rachel's instincts screamed to leave, but curiosity, that irresistible pull toward the unknown, anchored her in place. She moved closer, trying to rationalize what she saw. Maybe it was the old floorboards settling, or a draft from the small window near the ceiling. Yet, the feeling of being watched was undeniable. The flashlight beam swept across the basement, revealing shelves lined with jars containing strange, preserved items. Insects, small animals, and unidentifiable objects suspended in murky liquid. Each jar seemed to pulse faintly in the beam, a subtle, hypnotic movement that made Rachel step back. A soft creak echoed somewhere behind her. She spun around. Nothing. Only the shadowed corners of the basement. Yet, the sensation of presence persisted, heavy and oppressive, pressing in from every direction. Rachel explored cautiously, navigating narrow paths between stacks of crates. Her flashlight illuminated torn photographs scattered across a table. Faces stared back at her, eyes dark and hollow, expressions twisted in fear and pain. Among the photos, she found a notebook, its pages yellowed and brittle. Scribbled notes, symbols, and frantic writing filled the pages. One sentence repeated, over and over, as if burned into the writer's mind. They are watching. They are waiting. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked sharply behind her, closer than it should have been. Rachel froze, holding her breath. The rocking chair stopped midsway. The shadows seemed to recoil, almost as if something had moved in anticipation. Her flashlight flickered, then stabilized, revealing an empty path behind her. Yet the oppressive feeling remained. Every instinct screamed that she was not alone, that the basement itself had become a trap. She tried to retreat, but the basement seemed to stretch, twisting in ways that defied logic. Hallways extended where none should exist, corners deepened unnaturally, and the air grew colder with each step. A faint whisper carried across the room. "You shouldn't be here." Rachel's pulse raced. She called out softly, her voice trembling. "Who's there?" Only silence answered. Yet every shadow now seemed to shift subtly, moving just beyond the edge of her perception. Her flashlight illuminated a door at the far end of the basement she hadn't seen before. A heavy, iron-bound door with rusted hinges. It exuded menace, a sense that whatever lay beyond was both ancient and patient. Rachel's hands shook as she approached it, heart hammering in her chest. The whispering returned, now louder, layered, surrounding her. "Leave, before it's too late." Summoning courage, she tried the door. Locked, of course. But the lock was old, and a faint trickle of hope or madness surged through her. She could hear something moving behind the door, subtle yet deliberate. A scraping sound, rhythmic and almost communicative, echoed faintly. Rachel pressed her ear to the metal. The sound stopped, then a single, chilling whisper. "You belong." Panic surged, cold and sharp. She stumbled back, tripping over a crate, her flashlight spinning wildly, casting grotesque shadows across the walls. The basement seemed alive, breathing, pulsing with a presence she could neither see nor escape. Every instinct screamed at her to run. Yet the stairs she had descended now seemed impossibly distant, the path back twisted and unfamiliar. Rachel's hands brushed against a nearby shelf, knocking jars to the floor. The sound shattered the oppressive silence. Somewhere in the shadows, she heard a faint movement, scraping, shifting, just beyond the edge of vision. Her breath came in shallow, rapid gasps. The basement was no longer just a room. It had become a living entity, patient, intelligent, and malevolent. Finally, with trembling strength, she bolted for the stairs. The basement seemed to resist, shadows twisting, floorboards groaning under invisible weight. Behind her, a faint, distorted laughter echoed, carried on a cold draft that pressed against her neck. Rachel climbed the stairs two at a time, bursting into her apartment above, slamming the basement door shut. The heavy wooden door shuddered as if something on the other side had tried to follow her. She leaned against the door, chest heaving, mind racing. Every instinct screamed that the basement had not just been a space, but a trap, a waiting room for something patient, ancient, and inescapable. The house was quiet again, the city outside calm and indifferent, yet the memory of the whispers, the shadows, and the oppressive presence lingered, a dark promise that it was still waiting. And as Rachel sat trembling on the floor, she realized with growing dread that some doors, once opened, could never truly be closed. Ethan was driving home late one rainy night, the highway slick and reflective under the bright glare of his headlights. The storm had picked up, wind whipping the wipers across his windshield in frantic, uneven strokes. He had been alone for hours, the only company the rhythmic hum of his tires and the occasional flash of distant headlights. The road was deserted, an endless stretch of black asphalt cutting through the mist-shrouded countryside. As he rounded a bend, a figure appeared on the shoulder. A young woman, soaked by the rain, thumb outstretched, thumb trembling from the cold. Her hair clung to her face, wet and dark, and she shivered despite the heavy coat she wore. Ethan slowed, heart pounding, instinctively pulling over. Something about her seemed fragile, alone, and entirely in need of help. "Are you okay?" he called through the half-open window, concern threading his voice. She nodded, stepping toward the car. Her eyes were wide, glistening with fear or perhaps exhaustion, and Ethan felt an immediate pull of empathy. "Can you give me a ride? My car broke down up the road," she said, voice soft, almost melodic. He hesitated for only a moment before unlocking the door. As she slid into the passenger seat, the car's interior seemed warmer, safer, yet a subtle chill lingered in the corners. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, though he couldn't pinpoint what. Her hands were cold, pale, almost unreal in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. He offered her a towel, and she accepted silently, brushing wet strands of hair from her face with delicate, trembling fingers. The drive was quiet at first. Rain hammered the windshield, wipers squealing in protest. The woman's gaze was fixed on the blurred scenery, expression distant, yet tense. Ethan tried to make conversation, small talk about the weather, the storm, the road, but she gave only minimal replies. Her silence was unsettling, a weight pressing against the small space of the car. Then, without warning, she spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "This road, it's dangerous at night. You shouldn't be out here." Ethan glanced at her, puzzled. But the road behind them seemed ordinary, endless, yet claustrophobic under the storm's fury. Her warning sent a shiver down his spine. Something about the way she said it felt final, knowing, as if she had seen far more than any passerby should. Minutes passed. The storm grew stronger, lightning splitting the sky in brilliant, jagged bursts, illuminating the landscape in ghostly white. Ethan's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. When he glanced at her again, she seemed to shimmer in the low light, almost ethereal. His pulse quickened. Her eyes now held something impossible. A depth, an emptiness, a sadness that transcended the living world. He reached a bend near an old bridge, the rain pouring harder, water cascading along the road edges. He turned slightly to comment on the weather, only to find the passenger seat empty. The woman had vanished. Panic surged, his breath catching in his throat. He slammed on the brakes, skidding slightly on the wet asphalt, heart hammering as he searched the seat, the floor, every corner of the car. Nothing. She was gone without a trace. Ethan's mind raced. He replayed the drive in his head, every detail, every moment. It made no sense. No door had opened, no seatbelt undone, no movement to indicate she had left. He was alone, the storm relentless, and the car felt heavier, colder, somehow emptier than before. His rational mind faltered, replaced by a gnawing dread, a primal understanding that he had encountered something impossible. Shaken, he pulled the car to the side of the road, rain pelting down in relentless sheets. Lightning illuminated the landscape again, revealing the bridge in stark, unnatural clarity. There, on the side of the road where he had first seen her, stood a figure, barely visible in the rain, her outline ghostly and trembling. She raised a hand, waved softly, then disappeared into the mist as though swallowed by the storm itself. Ethan's hands shook on the wheel. The car felt impossibly silent now, the only sound the rain hammering the roof and windshield. He realized the truth. The woman had never been fully part of this world. She had been the classic vanishing hitchhiker, a spectral presence bound to the road, waiting for travelers to carry her for a brief, haunting moment before slipping back into the shadows. Weeks later, Ethan would drive that same road in daylight, the storm long gone. He would see the bridge, the shoulder, the asphalt slick but empty. Rationality tried to soothe him, yet the memory remained vivid. The wet hair clinging to her face, the whisper of warning, the impossibly hollow gaze. It wasn't just fear that lingered. It was awe, a chilling, cinematic sense that some mysteries were eternal, patient, and inescapable. That night, the road had felt alive. Every curve, every shadow, every distant echo of rain carried the memory of the encounter. Ethan could still hear her voice, a whisper carried on the wind. "You shouldn't be out here." It was not a threat. It was a reminder that some presences, some mysteries, do not belong to time, and do not disappear, no matter how far one drives. The vanishing hitchhiker had left him with more than fear. She had left him with the understanding that the world is far larger, stranger, and more cinematic than he had ever imagined. And somewhere, on that same rain-soaked road, she waited for the next traveler, patient, eternal, and hauntingly real. Mara had been visiting her father in the hospital for weeks. The sterile scent of disinfectant and the constant hum of machines had become an oppressive presence, suffocating and relentless. The night shift was eerily quiet. Most nurses had retreated to the break room, leaving the ward bathed in dim, flickering fluorescent light. Mara's father slept fitfully, hooked to monitors that beeped in mechanical rhythm, the only sound that punctuated the oppressive silence. Tonight, Mara noticed something strange. Across the hallway, room 312 stood darkened, the door slightly ajar despite being unoccupied according to the nurse's chart. At first, she dismissed it, attributing it to a maintenance oversight. Yet a faint movement caught her eye, a shadow shifting just beyond the frosted glass of the door. Her pulse quickened. The hospital, usually a place of calm, had suddenly transformed into a stage for the uncanny. Curiosity overcame her caution. Mara approached the door slowly, the polished floor cold beneath her feet, her reflection fragmented and stretched by the dim overhead lights. She peered inside. The room was empty. The bed lay unmade, sheets tangled, but there was no one there. And yet, she could feel it. The air was heavier here, dense and unyielding, pressing down with invisible fingers. A soft, irregular whisper carried from the corner of the room. "Why are you here?" Mara froze. Her mind raced, rational thoughts clashing with the undeniable sensation that she was not alone. Shadows pooled in the corners of the room, darker than any shadow should be, moving with subtle intent. The faint flicker of the monitors cast a cold, bluish light, creating shapes that seemed almost human. A figure just out of focus, waiting, watching. Her hands trembled as she reached for the doorknob. The metal was ice-cold, sending a jolt of fear through her spine. Stepping inside, Mara's flashlight, a small, handheld beam she carried for comfort, illuminated the space unevenly. The bed was unremarkable, the chair by the window dusty, yet every object seemed to pulse with quiet energy. Her eyes were drawn to the far corner, where the shadows converged. Something shifted there, subtle but undeniable. A silhouette, featureless, yet unmistakably alive. Mara swallowed hard, her throat dry, as the whispering continued. "You shouldn't be here." She wanted to retreat, but an invisible weight held her in place. The room seemed to stretch subtly, elongating the walls, bending the ceiling in ways imperceptible yet profoundly unsettling. Her father's faint snores echoed down the hall, yet they felt distant, unreal. The hospital, a place of life and recovery, had become alien, hostile, a theater for an unseen presence that thrived on fear and isolation. The shadow moved closer. It did not walk, it glided, deliberate, fluid, patient. Mara's mind tried to rationalize. A trick of the light, her exhaustion, stress, grief. But every instinct screamed otherwise. The air grew colder, the whispers overlapping, forming words she couldn't comprehend fully but understood implicitly. The room was alive and she was not welcome. Mara backed toward the door, flashlight trembling. The shadows pulsed, responding to her movements, reshaping the space, warping perception. She realized with mounting terror that this was not a one-time hallucination. The presence had been waiting, patient, capable of subtle manipulation of reality itself. Her father's monitors beeped steadily, yet even that sound seemed altered, slower, dragging, as if time had bent around the room. Then, a low hum emanated from the corner where the shadow lingered, deep and vibrating. Mara's chest tightened. Every nerve screamed flight, yet her legs refused to obey. A cold wind circled the room, despite the sealed windows. The whispers grew louder, forming a chorus that seemed to come from every surface. Walls, ceiling, floor. The air pressed closer, a tangible force, pushing her toward panic. Her flashlight flickered, dimming to near nothing, then surged, revealing a figure now more defined. Featureless, but undeniably human-shaped. Its form exuded patience and menace simultaneously. It stopped a few feet from her, silent, yet present in every fiber of the room. The whispers converged into a single, clear phrase. "You see me now." Mara's throat tightened, tears stinging her eyes. She realized that the entity was not just observing. It had been waiting for recognition, for fear to fully manifest. Summoning courage, she took a step back, moving toward the door. It seemed impossibly far, as if the room had expanded subtly to trap her. The figure followed, gliding closer with each heartbeat, shadows stretching unnaturally along the walls. Mara's hands gripped the doorknob, and with a desperate twist, she pulled it open. The hallway greeted her with cold fluorescent light, seemingly normal, yet Mara knew better. The hospital had been a stage, the silent room a theater for an unseen force, and the shadow had been its actor, patient, eternal, and unrelenting. The room behind her remained dark, quiet, yet alive, a dormant threat that could awaken at any moment. As she returned to her father's bedside, heart still racing, Mara realized something terrifying. She had survived the encounter, but the memory, the sensation, and the whispering presence had marked her. Sleep that night would be impossible. The shadow had left its imprint, patient and watching. Every quiet hospital room, every darkened corridor, would now hold the memory of that silent, oppressive presence. Even in daylight, the encounter haunted her mind. Shadows in the corner of her eyes, subtle movements in the periphery, the faintest whisper of air, all carried the same weight, the same dread. The silent hospital room had revealed a truth. Some presences do not need to be loud, do not need to attack. Patience, observation, and quiet persistence are enough to terrify, to unnerve, to linger. And somewhere, in the dim and quiet of the night, the shadow waited. Patient, silent, eternal. Lucas had always been drawn to the outskirts of his hometown, the abandoned cemeteries and forgotten fields that time had neglected. There was a strange comfort in decay, a quiet poetry in gravestones weathered by centuries of rain and wind. But one overcast afternoon, he stumbled upon something far darker than the quiet elegance he usually sought. A freshly dug, unmarked grave hidden beneath a cluster of gnarled oak trees. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of wet earth and moss. The sky hung low, gray and oppressive, as if the clouds themselves were pressing down on the scene. Lucas's heart pounded as he approached the shallow mound. No tombstone, no marker, nothing to indicate whose body might lie beneath. Just the dark, disturbed soil, still soft, as if the earth had barely been claimed by time. His fingers trembled as he reached toward the ground, brushing away loose dirt, a chill running down his spine. He knelt beside the grave, noticing subtle signs of life, faint, almost imperceptible depressions in the soil, suggesting recent disturbance. Lucas's mind raced. Who had been buried here? Why was it unmarked? The forest around him felt suddenly alive, shadows stretching long and unnatural, leaves rustling in whispers that seemed almost like voices. The world had contracted to this single point, the unmarked grave pulsing with unseen energy, waiting, patient. A sudden movement caught his eye. From the corner of the clearing, a figure emerged. A man, tall and thin, indistinct, wearing dark clothing that seemed to merge with the shadows. Lucas froze, heart hammering. The figure's face was partially obscured by a hood, but even the hint of features was enough to instill deep unease. The stranger did not speak, did not approach, simply observed from a distance, silent and watchful. The air grew colder. Lucas felt it pressing in, the forest narrowing, compressing, the shadows thickening around the grave. He reached for his phone, intending to call someone, anyone, yet the device slipped from his fingers as though invisible hands intervened. A low, almost imperceptible whisper carried through the trees. "You shouldn't be here." Panic surged, but curiosity, that dangerous blend of fear and fascination, held him in place. He leaned closer, examining the freshly turned soil. Something glinted faintly beneath the surface, the edge of a small metal object. Carefully, he brushed away the remaining dirt, revealing a tarnished locket. The metal was cold, icy to the touch, and as he opened it, he felt the weight of something ancient and malevolent pressing against his mind. Inside the locket was a faded photograph, the edges curled and brittle. The image depicted a family, smiling, yet every face carried an unnatural pallor, eyes hollow and lifeless, gazing directly at him, penetrating. Lucas staggered back, dropping the locket. It landed on the soft soil, but instead of lying flat, it rotated slightly, as if turning to face him deliberately. The shadows around the grave deepened, writhing subtly, responding to his fear. A sudden sound made him spin around, footsteps on the leaf-strewn path, crunching softly yet deliberately. The figure in the hood had moved closer, still silent, every motion deliberate, patient. Lucas's breath quickened. He could feel the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on him from all directions. The forest had shifted, the trees forming unnatural angles, shadows that moved independently of light, as if the world itself had become a trap. Desperate, he tried to retreat, moving toward the path that led back to the road. Yet the clearing seemed to stretch impossibly, the path elongating and twisting, the forest darkening with every step. The whispering grew louder, layered, unintelligible yet understood, carrying a sense of warning and inevitability. Leave or join us. Lucas's mind struggled to maintain rationality, yet every instinct screamed that the forest, the grave, and the hooded figure were connected in a presence far older and patient than human comprehension. The figure stopped near the edge of the grave, motionless. Lucas could feel its gaze not just on him but through him, probing, testing, assessing. He stumbled backward, tripping over exposed roots, landing hard on the wet soil. The whispers coalesced into a single phrase, chillingly clear. "Your curiosity belongs to us now." Every hair on his body stood on end. The forest seemed to exhale, a low, resonant sigh that pressed into his chest like a physical force. Summoning every ounce of courage, Lucas scrambled to his feet and ran, branches clawing at his jacket, mud and leaves coating his legs. He didn't look back, but the sensation of being followed persisted, shadows brushing against him at the periphery of his vision. When he finally burst onto the road, panting, the forest seemed calm again, the clearing gone as if it had never existed. Yet the memory of the unmarked grave, the locket, and the hooded figure remained etched into his mind, vivid and unrelenting. Weeks later, he would return to the location during daylight, hoping rationality could reclaim the space. But the clearing was replaced by indistinct forest, the grave invisible, the air ordinary. The locket, the photograph, and the whispering presence existed only in memory, yet they had left a permanent scar on his perception. Some mysteries, Lucas realized, do not yield to reason. They are patient, eternal, and impossible to escape. And somewhere, deep within the forgotten forest, the unmarked grave waited. Patient, silent, and eternal, a cinematic testament to what lurks beyond human comprehension.